Hello everyone. Hello everyone, and welcome to the last lecture on Module 3, Understanding Culture and Lifespan Development, Concept and Current Perspectives. My name is Carissa, and it's my pleasure to be your master of ceremony for today's session. This course is hosted by the Center for Indigenous and Cultural Psychology and the Center for Lifespan Development at the Faculty of Psychology, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Today, we'll be focusing on a compelling topic, which is understanding risk and resilience in developmental diversity through the lens of deaf culture. Okay. Before we begin, I would like to remind all the participants that the language used in this international online summer course is in English. For those who need assistance in expressing questions or ideas in English, please contact your student liaison during the session. They will assist in translating the questions into English. English captioning is also available, which can be turned on by clicking the CC icon at the bottom of the screen. So it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today's session, which is Surya Sayatapi from the Rochester Institute of Technology. He is a respected expert in the deaf culture and in developmental diversity. And to facilitate today's session, we are joined by Dr. Praditya Putri Pertiwi. And perhaps I will just give the time directly to Dr. Praditya to facilitate today's session.
Thank you very much, Carissa, and a very good evening to all participants of the 2024 summer course on cultural dynamics and lifespan development. And I would like to really give the warmest welcome to Surya Saitapi, our guest speakers for today. How are you, Surya? Joining us from New York. I believe this is morning time for you there, right, Surya? Okay. Yep.
That's accurate. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I'll just briefly introduce Surya, and I believe Surya can elaborate his own experience on this particular topic. So Surya is a visiting lecturer, adjunct faculty member, and an American Sign Language tutor at the Rochester Institute of Technology in the United States. He is also the co-founder of the organization Handai Tuli Indonesia, which advocates for the rights and empowerment of the deaf community in Indonesia. Surya also serves as a sign language instructor at the Center for Indonesian Sign Language or Pusat Bahasa Indonesia, Isyarat Indonesia, contributing to the promotion and education of Indonesian Sign Language. And in recognition of his outstanding contributions, Surya was honored with 2023 International Students Outstanding Service Awards and the Outstanding Graduating Student Award in his master's degree program. He was also selected as a delegate for the NTID Graduate College, this reflecting his leaderships and academic excellence. What a really remarkable achievement, Surya. So today, Surya will share about the risk and resilience in developmental diversity, learning from deaf culture. This session will cover historical and social contexts that define deaf culture, the specific risk faced by deaf individuals, such as educational and accessibility challenges, and also the community's resilience strategies, including advocacy and community bonding. So without further ado, I will give the screen to Surya.
Well, good morning. I'm here to introduce myself, but thank you for that warm introduction. And I've been trying to set up interpreters for a couple of weeks, and it's challenging. So the interpreting in Indonesia is something that we're still growing and developing, and we hope that in the future we'll have more interpreters in the area, hoping to grow from 1 to 3 to 4 maybe. So we're looking to support our community in Indonesia and that of American Sign Language. So thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. Oh.
Berarti 2 kali 350.
Okay, so we're here to discuss how we learn from the culture, how it affects us, and how we can grow and develop together. So that's what we're going to be talking about here this morning, risk and resilience in developing diversity. First, I'll let everybody go ahead and read the agenda for today. One moment. Glance at the introduction on the screen. If there's any questions that come up, you can go ahead and send me an email. I would much appreciate that. I just add that side note because I think I just want to preserve our time here together. But I am open to continuing to have conversations and to interact with anyone after the conclusion of today's presentation. Thank you. I was just giving everybody some time to glance over the slides. And once you have a moment to read the slides, then I'll go ahead. So again, I am a deaf gentleman, Serial, and I am a SODA. So I have siblings of deaf adults. We refer to that as SODA. And I'm multilingual. I have 3 modalities that I teach, and I have American Sign Language, a written language, and also a spoken language. So my first sign language was home signs, developed at home with my family. My L2, my Indonesian sign language. My third is BSL, so more American Sign Language is my fourth, and the third was the British Sign Language. So English and Indonesian Sign Language tend to be my primary. My L3 spoken languages, the Indonesian spoken language. I learned that at the equivalence of my spoken language in Indonesia, that of equivalent of maybe a 5-year-old. So I don't have in-depth conversations with people in my spoken language. It's more just primary, basic survival. So my preferred communication access through a sign language or a written language rather than a spoken language. I grew up in Indonesia for 25 years before moving to Rochester, New York. And with that said, I've been here for the past 6 years. Moved to New York to study American Sign Language, British Sign Language. And my bachelor's was in international studies. My grad level is in deaf education. As of last year, I applied to become a visiting lecturer from the Department of Masters of Science, specifically in second education, deaf and hard of hearing students. The goal is to encourage students to become educators themselves. So this semester, I am actually teaching a total of 5 courses. They're all different. I have a structure of ASL, deaf history, education on a cultural level. And with that, I would like to summarize and talk a little bit about a much more today. We're going to elaborate about deaf culture, some of the challenges that we face, and strategies that we're looking forward to apply to overcome some of those barriers. All right, so if we're on board, then we'll go ahead and dive into deaf challenges and strategies. So I've done an in-depth dive into deaf culture. And before we dive in together, I just wanted to introduce a few images to look here to the screen. And you ask yourself, what are these images? They're typically book titles, and that's how we gain a lot of knowledge. That's kind of what influences us as a deaf individual. So I would encourage all of you to take a look at these texts and go ahead and pick them up, dive in, and just see how you can integrate that into your life. So everyone has a journey, and all of our journeys are different, but each and every individual journey can be rich. So people often wonder, what does deaf culture look like? How does a hearing person understand and perceive the world differently than that of a deaf individual? Deaf people require light because it's a visual language, hands, and we have to have the light. So the room needs to be illuminated in order for us to take in the information physically. Turn off the lights, then communication basically shuts down. It's as if a hearing person can't hear something, similar environment without light, can't visually obtain any information. And so light is simply crucial communication. Often people find themselves in a dark environment and they'll improvise, sometimes simply as simple as a flashlight, maybe that found on a cell phone. But illuminating the environment, providing light, is crucial in this sense that it's a visual language. That's how we understand one another, communicate with each other. See these images here? We notice the shape is the basic difference. There is a round table and there's a square table. That's what I want you to take notice of. Why is that important? Again, deaf people would situate themselves in a circle so that they can be across from each other and have visual access to everyone that's at the table. While this square table is a much more accustomed to a hearing environment, and it's more challenging for deaf individuals to lose eyesight. If you're sitting beside somebody, you can't see somebody that's sitting in that same row, and it ends up blocking the visual line of sight. So we're not dependent on our ears, we're dependent on our eyes. And so we need to have open visual lines to be able to communicate. And so it's respecting of self and respecting of others. And deaf community uses their eyes. If you don't make eye contact within the deaf community, it's considered rude to break that eye gaze. So if you don't use your eyes to communicate, that's just a really big cultural difference. And it is unique, the deaf culture, but imperative as well. This next slide, another cultural difference to notice between deaf and hearing cultures is spoken language. Simply, the image here is depicting somebody speaking over the telephone. And often deaf people are saying, well, what's the conversation? What's going on? Because they're not privy to any sort of spoken language. So sometimes a hearing individual will hold a phone in one hand and they'll try to interpret one hand saying, oh, this is what the information coming in might be. And so they try to interpret that conversation. Public signing, I use the term public signing. Public signing is a concept that we use. We also use the term SYNCOM. SYNCOM means like spoken language and sign language happening simultaneously at the same time. So if you have an individual that's talking about a work opportunity and then you have a deaf person that can see that SYNCOM or that signed language, then it's shared information, right? So it keeps people involved in the conversation. It also is critical to provide access. So it means if you don't respect what's happening within this environment, then Oh,
This is the other interpreter. Do you need my help? Oh, the screen went away. This is the other interpreter. You may take over for a while?
For your text for I was looking for your text for clarification.
Oh, in Teams? Yeah, I sense. Okay.
Sorry, this is the interpreter, and I just wasn't sure if I was clear about the public access of information, so I'm asking him to go ahead and just reiterate. Okay, so I just wanted to provide some clarification. So, like you just saw, an interpreter communicating with a deaf individual in the purpose of sharing information. So what I wanted to say is we have communication repairs. Obviously, you just saw a great example of that. The point of this slide is public signing, meaning information is shared in a public environment. So people who might be working in this environment, be it a student and an educator, they have to use sign language to keep the information open to everyone. And so if somebody is a passerby, or maybe you're having a conversation and you're sitting in a restaurant, right? So there'll be somebody that's speaking, but also it's being interpreted so that you're sharing information with your deaf consumer. But that information then becomes public. So if there's a student in the room, everybody would be privy to that information. But we also ask that anytime a deaf individual is in the room, that if you're a student and you're learning sign language, or if you're a proficient interpreter, that you still pick up your hands and provide that visual communication. Okay, this image that you see here on the screen talks about maybe a meeting or a class that's going on. Maybe there's a presenter in the front of the room, and then somebody just needs to privately step out and go to the restroom. It's okay to just stand up and leave the room without giving explicit information. A lot of people would think that in the hearing culture. However, in the deaf culture, I would say that that's not necessarily appropriate. And that throws people sometimes. But again, this is a cultural difference or distinction that I would like to make. I see some head nods. So if you have a meeting or maybe a classroom and you have a deaf instructor, someone who were to stand up and leave the room, they give a simple sign indicating, I'm just going to step out to the restroom for a moment. And it's just shared information. It's as if you're in a meeting and somebody stands up and walks out. Then you feel like, is the information I'm sharing or teaching not important? Or why would you, excuse yourself from the meeting? So again, it's just a respecting of self and respecting of others. So while a hearing professor, you might not need to share that information, stand up and walk away. But in the deaf culture, you would just give an indication of why you're stepping out, leaving that meeting, and also letting them know when you'll be returning. That's just respect, mutual respect in the deaf culture. I want you to stop and look at this artistic rendition, Celebrating Deaf Culture by Mary Rapazzo. It means we have to accept our expression, and specifically our expression of our individual cultures. Some deaf individuals are scared or threatened by the deaf culture. I say that's because people often say, oh, they have different or odd behaviors. Maybe it's behaviors we're not used to. So then people get scared, and then deaf people internalize that, and they sort of shy away from their own. It's not something that we want to be frightened of or be embarrassed of, but it's something that we want to express openly. And with that, we need to educate other cultures so that the deaf culture's behaviors might look or be perceived differently. This is what's considered normal within our culture. And then if we share that information, other people become more accustomed to the norms of our culture. And then we can help each other break down some barriers, and we'll all have less struggles. So again, not all schools in Indonesia have a deaf culture. And I'll say that again, not all deaf schools in the Indonesian community have a deaf culture. And so we need to even teach deaf individuals to have pride of their culture. And then as soon as they develop that confidence, they can share that within other deaf people, broadening and bringing a deaf culture, and then we can become more inclusive in our future. Here are some pioneer leaders that have really just focused and developed the word culture. So historically, these are the pioneers in our field that have done the research. They developed American Sign Language dictionaries. Originally, we had Stokey. He was a deaf professor. He was a hearing professor in the deaf culture. Caroline Patton is a deaf woman. She brought the Japanese sign language to light. Kronberg from Sweden, another pioneer in the field. So it's fascinating to international students. But again, they did the research of sign language back in their era and their time. And American culture would look down on sign language, any sign language in general. And they thought, oh, sign language is not a bona fide language. So that's what these pioneers started researching. They started realizing it has syntax, rules, grammar, linguistics. And they did the research to say that sign language is, in fact, a bona fide language. American Sign Language is, in fact, linguistic. It has structure. It has phonemes, grammar. It is not to be compared with English, but they would use name signs, and they would say like, oh, an A is equivalent. And you see that hand shape show up in vocabulary, or B, boy would show up in their vocabulary. So they're saying hand shapes. In fact, English phonemes, okay. Like A is for apple, or you have a hand shape here, and it differentiates space. You have hand shapes and parameters. The same thing in the spoken language happens in the sign language. There are differences, but there are many comparisons when you talk about language. And another pioneer is Catherine Meadows. There was, from her research, she really expanded our understanding of language. And then in 1977, Roy Holcomb, he published about deaf culture. And oh, it's a beautiful book. It's funny. It's a great read, but it also explains how deaf families, I think it was generational, how deaf families can survive and thrive. And they're not dependent on their hearing abilities. They're dependent on their language, that of sign language. So it's just a great read. It's enjoyable. I would encourage everyone to pick that up. And then last, I wanted to mention Carol Patton. She's a linguistics professor. She did a lot of research about culture. She explained what is culture, what is the definition of culture, what is the broader sense of culture, like an American culture, and then there's a hearing and a deaf culture. She really supported the deaf community life as human beings and their journey through life and their progress. Without this exposure of culture, people would struggle with their identity. They're trying to join a broader society. So imagine if I didn't have any exposure to culture, I probably wouldn't be here. You know, I would be considered a second-class citizen, you know, less than or not equal to. I might be at home without a language, things of that. So that's how far culture can bring or include somebody, bring them alongside a culture and providing an education. There's so many resources for deaf culture. It's rich. There's a lot of research that went into this, how it affects people's life, how people internalize culture. So again, there's more resources here on the slides. Had deaf schools, publications. Again, we can't compare Indonesia with American Sign Language. And you'll see those differences. First of all, the schools that are set up in the United States were established back in the 1800s, 1864 to be specific. Where here in Indonesia, I think the first deaf school wasn't established until 1930s. It wasn't until the 1930s. You can see that there's a huge time difference. The attitude, the acceptance is different. First American Sign Language Dictionary was published in 1965, while in Indonesia, I don't think it was published until 2007, 2009. That's the timeline. First published sign language dictionary in Indonesia. So there's drastic differences. The research in the field, you can see the comparisons. In Indonesia, some of that information and research wasn't available. And so deaf people had more of a label from like a medical perception, right? Not so much that of a cultural perception for an Indian. So we talk about culture. Now I'm going to pivot for just a minute and talk a little bit about the journey of the deaf individual and something that talk about maybe individual weaknesses or risks.
Okay, can you hear me okay? You have an interpreter? Okay, thank you. Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much. The interpreter has to leave, so now we're going to switch interpreters. Okay, so before we continue, these interpreters work 24 hours, and they're regulated by the FCC. So the video relay interpreters are available 24 hours a day, which is really pretty cool. Yep. So it's very nice, but it's only available for emergencies, but you have an interpreter in an emergency. So we've got one now. So hopefully in your country, Indonesia, you got interpreters ready there 24 hours a day too. Maybe someday. Okay, so anyway, here, we're back to the point. This is so important. It's such an important topic, a significant topic, language deprivation. And we see this as very common in society. You know that most statistics show, as we look into this, that deaf children, 90% of them have hearing parents and hearing family members. That means they don't know sign language. And so how are these deaf children going to be exposed to sign language? That's the issue here. So, and the problem here is resources. There are some cities that don't have any deaf communities. They don't have any schools for the deaf, or schools don't have any programs for deaf students. And so the situations vary. And there's some misunderstandings. Again, there's a medical perspective of thinking that a sign is to support listening, you know, and to help the deaf with their listening skills. But really, it doesn't replace it. It's one of their tools to support them, you know, with their listening. So there's a variety of thoughts on this. And some deaf can hear a little bit. Some deaf are totally profoundly deaf. So there's a broad spectrum of hearing loss. So we'll have to discuss that another time. We're just going to touch on it today. So hopefully now we can have more time. We can discuss this in more depth and discuss the different levels of hearing loss and the variety of deaf people in the deaf community. Now, I'd like to recommend that you read this book here, Language Deprivation and Its Connection with Mental Health. And so that's research-based, and it explains the impact of language deprivation and what it can cause, how it can affect communication skills, how it can cause feelings of isolation. And so they've researched this information and see how it's connected to people's mental health. And most of them are psychiatrists, psychologists, and physicians and psychiatrists who have been involved in this and research. And so this is important to be aware of. Now, there's some people have a misconception that deaf people are angry, the way they talk, and they think, oh boy, this person has a temper. But really, that's not the case. That's just their way of expression. Well, how would you know if a deaf person has mental health issues? This book goes into it. It talks about how to advocate for them too, and how to reduce their mental health issues. So it's really a good read. I recommend you read this book. Oh, just one moment. This is the interpreter speaking. I need to sign out the other interpreter. One moment. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll proceed now. So this book is very important in explaining these type of issues. There's two common myths about language deprivation and sign language. Some people say that if there's language deprivation, it's because they're deaf. Well, really, that's not the case. Becoming deaf doesn't mean language deprivation in of itself. Language deprivation is caused by no access to language. So that means they don't have enough exposure to language, no access. So they need more language access. On the other hand, sign language deprivation, how that can be reduced, that can help actually by language, can help them, sign language helps them with their hearing. Well, that's not true. Learning and exposure, learning sign language will not hurt a deaf person's writing skills or reading skills. Actually, will make them better and help them improve them in their reading and writing. And it improves it and also helps their speech too. So the United States has some audiologists out there who know sign language. And so they're able to communicate with the deaf patients. Now, also, the person who's deaf has two languages. They're bimodal. They can sign or they can write English. And so they're able to incorporate these languages in their brain, and then it helps the brain to function even better. And they're able to learn better. And also, good social interactions of how they're able to, and also able to control their emotions. Sometimes if they're upset, they're not sure how to control that. For anxiety, you don't know how to control that. And that's a part of SEL, that emotional learning. And so nowadays, most deaf students are gaining access, but they still struggle with controlling the SEL. And this is the interpreter. I've not heard of that term, SEL. What's it mean? Social emotional learning. Okay, thank you. Okay, here's the statistics here from the NDC, the National Deaf Center, okay? And that's University of Austin, Texas. And they've done some research about how many, comparing deaf people who graduate from high school and from college and has degrees and bachelor's and master's and PhDs, comparing the rate between deaf and hearing people. So the point, deaf people with a PhD in Indonesia, I mean, how many are there? The people in general, the general population, 270 million, right? But deaf, there's only 3 who have a PhD. So here in the United States, well, there's 300 million, but definitely the PhD, maybe 6 to 700. For lawyers, 400. There are 400 deaf lawyers. But in Indonesia, there are no deaf lawyers, maybe 2 or 3. So it's kind of funny. I mean, I'm a little bit like, wow. I mean, here in the campus of the RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, they've got 20,000 students. 1,300 are deaf. Okay, remember 1,300 deaf students on this campus. And how many interpreters do we have? 144 interpreters here. And then for doing captioning, 40. There's around 40 people doing captioning. And note takers, about 300, more than 300 note takers. So Indonesia, maybe there's 150 or 200 like that, I'm not sure, for services for 22 million deaf people. Is 2 or 3 million deaf people. Wow. So here in the United States, they've got 17 programs for interpreting, 16 or 17 programs for interpreting. That means people can become, proficient and get a degree in interpreting. Indonesia doesn't have any. So that makes a big difference. And that's also why, there's, a difficulty in getting support for going to deaf people getting education. And there's how many faculty in Indonesia know sign language. Here in RIT, we've got 400 faculty, instructors and professors, around 400. It doesn't matter whether they're hearing or deaf, they're all fluent in sign language. So here's a statistic about earnings or income or salary. We can see a discrepancy there. Hearing people learn more than deaf people do. I don't know if it's taboo to talk about that in Indonesia or not, about earnings. Some people accept a job even though where earnings are lower than hearing people. So we have to have an open discussion about pay equality here, and we have to share. Hearing culture, maybe they wouldn't discuss these things, and so it's important, to see what life is like in the different areas and learn from each other, and so we can make decisions as a society. For example, with our employment, there may be a difference. Would we accept a low-paying job? So that's some discussion about how would those average incomes, average earnings there, and that affects your life. Being deaf costs more than being hearing. For example, we have to get captioning, getting interpreters and services. Indonesia, we have to pay for it ourselves. I lived there for 25 years, but I never got free interpreting. I had to pay for that if I had an Indian interpreter. So I wouldn't want to go to the hospital very often. I don't have to pay for an interpreter in Indonesia. So just to have my health checked out. And of course, the doctors know sign language in Indonesia. So, but here in the United States, in Rochester, it's much better. They have hospitals to accommodate the needs of the deaf, and there's plenty of deaf in the community. So some of the doctors are actually CODAs, means that they have deaf parents. So they grew up signing. And so you can come in and meet a doctor who knows sign language, or they have an interpreter. Most of the hospitals here have, there's just one hospital here, but it has 7 full-time interpreters on staff. So it doesn't matter if people are hearing or deaf, they've got interpreters. So that means the hospital itself is, giving credit and supporting the deaf community. Okay, just checking on the interpreter. Okay. Now, well, there's the last topic. So all we have time for then. What is your allyship? How do you advocate for the deaf community? There are many people who want to support the deaf community, And there's the right way and there's the wrong way. So this is interesting. Let's talk about the wrong way first. Sometimes hearing people view themselves as helpers of the deaf or the saviors of the deaf. Okay? And by help, but they want to help, but they do it the wrong way. And being an ally is more about supporting and in a way that the deaf community will accept. You have to listen more. So we'll discuss this in more depth here. Okay, so this general information is about being an ally. So what does it mean to be an ally? Well, you already have to incorporate, do your best to advocate for this marginalized group and try to uplift them. And for example, I'll give you an example here. As a deaf individual, I use a sign language interpreter even though I have a master's degree, okay? So you have to explain to the person it's very important. They seem like maybe I think you're not serious or paying attention to me, okay? And that's fine, I can accept that. I have another friend who can hear, and he doesn't have a degree, a master's degree, or like that. But I explained the situation to him, and he said, well, talk directly to the individual and listen to him, not me, okay? So that means it's interesting. They tend to listen to him rather than me. So you can see the change in language. Why did you change the captioning? Did the captioning change? Okay, that's fine. Okay, it's a lot of change. Anyway, so that's how things happen sometimes. The ally is important. Hearing person prefer to talk with somebody who's hearing. Okay, they feel that connection to another hearing person rather than speaking to a deaf person, to an interpreter. So they would prefer to speak directly with a hearing somebody can hear. Okay, now there's 4 levels of allyship. We're going to talk about those. There's first is knowledge, skills, and action, and of course awareness. Now, so allyship. Sometimes we're apprehensive. We don't want to speak up, and we're afraid maybe we'll get fired or something like that. We don't want that to happen, and that people look at me in a bad way or something like that. So that's a challenge, yes. And so that's one of the challenges of being an ally. Okay, so in the beginning, discussions about deaf culture and how the term deaf culture first appeared, and then having a allyship, supporting deaf people. We can see the history of that. So in 1965, started with recognizing deaf culture. That means they explained, to hearing people to help them to understand our culture as deaf people. And so then that's part of our community, how we support each other. And then that's okay. If you see deaf people in the deaf community and they're having their culture, that's okay. Previously, hearing people would see hearing people deaf culture say that's not normal. That's not the way the real world works. Don't do that. That's we have to understand hearing culture to survive. The autism, it was identified in 1975, and that was viewed as a negative thing, kind of a bad word there. And so autism, it's a long discussion. We couldn't cover all of it now, but really the point is that autism is discrimination based on hearing. If we see somebody deaf, we're like, oh, you're deaf? Did you go to school? No, that's impossible. You're going to struggle. Yeah. And so if we see deaf strength and survival, you have to be careful. You might get an accident. You're deaf. You can't hear. You might get in a car accident like that. Or you can't go to college because you're deaf. Or you can't become a lawyer or a teacher or whatever you want. You can't do that because you're deaf. You can't hear. And so one example that was a challenge with American deaf before, they couldn't become doctors. Now we see many deaf students, and many of them are nurses, and because they had other supports. So we appreciate the change in technology that helps the deaf community be involved in these professions. So autism, there are some people who they just don't know how to understand deaf people. And so maybe that person doesn't have enough exposure to understand deaf people. If they have enough exposure to deaf culture, well, then they wouldn't behave with that autism. Now, maybe you have done some research in your field on ethics of how it's involved in community research. Previously, there were a lot in the field, doing physical research, and then that was left. And there's no empowerment, no support, this notice of the work, no credit. So this person, Robert Q. Pollard, suggested about how hearing people should start their research by informing in researching deaf people formally with their ethics. So I'll have to send the title for that article. It's a very good article. Okay? Okay, the next thing is here, in 2021, there was a new article printed out, the guiding principles of how hearing people can be allies. And what do we want to do if we want to become an ally? So we're going to discuss that. We only have 10 minutes left, so. Hold on a minute, I'm trying to get this slide across. Okay, hold on a minute here. Okay, here we go. Okay. Okay, so the principles guiding hearing people with allyship, okay? So first of all, it's important to listen to us. Understand our community, understand our culture, understand our language, and understand everything that's involved with that in our journey. Learn how to get through your comfort zone, out of your comfort zone. Sometimes we're not comfortable discussing something. That's fine. That's normal. But we have to have this discussion, and then we'll know what to do next. When people educate you, and maybe they disagree with you, accept that. Just listen. And learn how to control your emotions. Learn what a person tells you, well, you're practicing autism and you're repressing deaf people. Well, just have that discussion. Say, why do you label me as being autistic? Why do you feel like I'm oppressing you? Okay. Number 2, there's nothing about us without us. What does that mean? Is you can't make decisions without the involvement of the deaf community. This is so important. The deaf community gets involved in decision making, and that sets up equality. Number 3, not all deaf people have access to sound. So how do you establish a place to make sure that they have access? How would you do that? I know that there's plenty of, not always have the resources we need, but we need to set up some way to figure out how to make it happen so it'll work smoothly with the community. Also, show support, like in having deaf equipment and businesses, business owners, whatever. Support those, and that'll uplift that deaf community. Okay, with that system. Number 4, it's important to advocate for the deaf community, give them the resources they need, the opportunities, and not to take advantage of them or exploit them, of their deaf needs for financial purposes. Give them work opportunities, empower them for positions of management, and don't do that, but don't do it for your own benefit. The last one, the fifth one, is using your allyship for supporting the deaf community, which means speaking up even if something's wrong. Speak up. And use your advantage, your privilege for uplifting the deaf community. So for here, there's so many hearing faculty who always say, I used to use my privilege for the deaf community, but I want to do that to encourage research in this, and have an opportunity how they can manage their money and train them, everything. And so if something happens, have the equipment. So we'll be on the same page, and we can grow together through this as a collective. And so that's, I think our time's just about out. Only got a few minutes left to discuss this anymore. So anyway, here's what we have here. And that's how you can take advantage of it. Website. Take a look at that and see all the different resources there. So sorry I had to be in such a rush. Okay, thank you. Very good. Just short discussion. I'll check out the answer these questions and I'll take off. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. We do have a few questions on Padlet. Probably Nabila, if you could share the Padlet, and then Surya can just address those questions. I think these are really great questions, Surya. So feel free to choose a question and which one do you want to address?
So you want me to take the question? Right. Okay. Here's the one. Where to start making things more accessible for deaf community.
Oh, my
So,
apologies. The interpreter sound is breaking.
hello, can you hear me now?
It's still breaking.
Hello?
I think it's the mic. Yes, now it's better now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So we'll start with a question, where to start? Where to start making things more accessible for the deaf community, and have an effective way to do that. So think about your role right now. Depends on what your role is. If you're working in the field, well, really, all our roles are connected. For example, if you're a doctor, well, then that means learning sign language and learn everything you can to understand, about how to be involved socially with the deaf and learning more about them, and make improvements, advancements in how to do this with the patients, and also try to fight the system, fight within the system to have them more accepting for future deaf students too. So it depends on your role. It's a very general question, but suppose right now you're working as faculty. Well, the goal for faculty then, think about future deaf faculty, so you can look for deaf, that are ready. For this program here that I'm in, here at RIT, we have a program that helps new faculty that are deaf become instructors and professors. And they have to train for 3 to 5 years. And they explain to them how to teach, how to do research, how to grade, how to work with the system, how to publish, that kind of thing. That's all the system. So really, there's a variety of ways to do that. Now, if you have a more general system, like say, for the government, they have a national agency, or on a local level. A local level, you could have maybe in your home area, is your home friendly? They have alarms for fire alarms for deaf people. If there's a fire, what did that person do? They wouldn't know if they can't hear the alarm. So how could they call 911 or call the fire department? I mean, how would they know what to do? So there's a whole variety of things could be done as far as in the home or in education. And so it depends on the content, what you're talking about, what your role is. So we'll talk about that more later. Okay, the other one here, let me read this over. Okay, yeah. So just the question basically is they're saying for a deaf student and their parents, if the parents do not want to learn sign language, again, remember the resources that are available. For example, well, here in the United States, we have 700 programs for ASL that are in high schools. More than 700 programs in high schools that teach ASL. So the hearing people are learning sign language and they're graduating, and maybe they're more deaf friendly, and then maybe they don't have deaf children, and so they already know ASL. And so because they already learned sign language previously. And without that, they would have never learned sign language, never had exposure, and they would have never met a deaf person. And so they would be afraid, how am I going to communicate with my deaf child? So, and I don't want to learn sign language, I just want them to learn to speak. So we have to build that bond there with their child. So that's that approach. I think in high school, having one organization where they can have advocate to have teach parents how to speak, communicate with their deaf children. And so, have people learn sign language and ask them why they learn sign language and introduce them, and they can be mentors. And I don't know what the system is there in high school in Indonesia, but my parents were looking for, and so when they have deaf children, they start looking for resources. Here in the United States, if the parents have a deaf child, they have to go to the hospital and they send a social worker to their home and explain about things related to deaf and introduce them to role models and mentors and a variety of services there, organizations too. And so the parents can decide which school they want to have the school attend and have the options and what kind of hearing supports like hearing aids they want and things like that. So they're all ready. Now, I'll have to discuss more about this later, but I'll handle that via email. Okay, the resources for learning sign language in Indonesia. Okay, well, they've got different organizations. Like I used to work for, I'll have to type this up on the screen here. 1 minute, please. I just put this up in the chat. So anyway, maybe as your university there, you can fight this system and open up new courses for sign language and Indonesian Sign Language, and then have deaf instructors there as faculty. Yeah, so because in Indonesia, I think they've got 2 or 3 universities that offer sign language for credit purposes. Like maybe only 3. That's not enough. Here in the United States, they've got 198 universities that offer ASL programs. So that means, 1 minute, please. Oh, yeah, Harvard University, Yale, they've got that there. So hopefully more, but I have in the United States 198. So if you follow my Instagram about my group, I'll explain all this stuff here, all the different ASL classes and where they're at. You can see that there. Okay, here's my last question. Sorry, I run out of time here. Okay, so inclusion for okay, opinions about the importance of being involved in disasters. Okay, so again, so there's all this information here. We involved in the deaf expertise, deaf professionals who are involved in these things. So we're going to talk more about these different areas here, but there's so much information and different experiences too. Everybody's experience is different. So again, remember, you're going to be involved. You have any ideas, you make decisions. Please involve the deaf community. I mean, that's a must. Okay. Hope that, and a lot of questions here. Just email if you wouldn't mind. Just email me those questions, and then I'll respond to you. Or we can have another meeting for questions too, if you want. We can set up another opportunity, one more for if you want to sometime. So it's up to you. You can email me or maybe set up a 30-minute meeting for questions and answers. If you're willing to, yeah. Just let me know. But thank you. Thank you for your patience with me and with us.
Thank you very much, Surya. I believe one session is not enough to discuss and learn about deaf culture, but I agree this session has been an eye-opening personally for me and maybe for all the participants as well. Surya has mentioned that if you still have questions, please send them out to Surya by email. If you could type your email on the chat box, Surya. So that would be great. And then I believe for the last time, because this is the last lecture of this summer course, if you could open your cam and let's take a picture together with Surya to commemorate this session as well. We would also like to thank the interpreters who already helped the session run smoothly today. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ditya, for moderating today's session. And I would also like to thank Surya for such an insightful lecture on risk and resilience within deaf culture. Your expertise has greatly enriched our understanding of these important issues. And a special thank you as well to all participants for your engagement and thoughtful questions. Your active participation has made this session truly valuable. And if your question hasn't been answered in the Padlet, feel free to send Surya your email so you can discuss more with him. And we have also, Surya has also dropped his email on the chat box, so you can contact him directly if you need anything else answered. We would also like to give our deepest apologies for our mistakes and any inconveniences that you may have faced throughout the summer course. And with that being said, you may also report these matters to your student liaison. And before we conclude this session, because it is actually the final session for the summer course, I would like to ask the participants to show your reaction for the overall summer course. Maybe you can give some emojis, or if you would like to share them via chat, we would really like to read and know what your reactions are. Okay, thank you so much for the love, the hearts. We're really happy to see that you enjoy these last few sessions with us, and really hope that these sessions are insightful and valuable to you to be able to learn more about culture and lifespan development as well. And before we conclude, I would also like to remind you for the last time that we will be having an online student-led conference on Monday, 14th October at 4 until 6 p.m. GMT +7. So please prepare the assignments that you have been working on with your groups, because you will be presenting them in the conference. The Zoom meeting link will be shared with you in the near future. And last time, before we truly end the session, let's take a picture together to document this moment. So I will count until 3, and then our committee will be helping in screenshotting the session. Okay, are you guys ready? Please prepare your best pose. I will count down to 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. Okay, for the second slide, please prepare your best poses so that we can take a picture together. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, please hold in your pose, because we will move to the last slide, because we don't know in which slide that you are currently in right now. For the last slide, we will take a picture. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, then. Thank you very much to all participants, and thank you as well to Surya for joining us today in today's session. We hope you found the session both informative and inspiring. Have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you sometime soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all participants. Thank you, Surya.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you.
Terima kasih.
Thank you very much,
Bye.
Surya.
Thanks.